My name is Sister Alara, and I am 88 years old. For 61 of those years, these quiet, hallowed walls at St. Jude's Haven in Mill Creek, Ohio, have been both my sanctuary and my meticulously constructed prison. The other sisters see me as a pillar of serene faith. They see the gentle hands that tend the rose garden and the patient ear that listens to their small worries. They don't see the 19-year-old girl still screaming inside me, a girl I buried alive under layers of black serge, false piety, and 6 decades of suffocating silence. Life here is a predictable, comforting rhythm, measured not in hours but in bells. Matins, lauds, vespers. Each time is a nail hammered into the coffin of my past, keeping it shut. I never receive personal mail. I have no one left. That is, until last Tuesday. Sister Beatrice, handling the correspondence, paused during our simple lunch. "Well, this is a curiosity," she hummed. "Sister Alara. This one is for you." The refectory went silent. Every eye was on me. The envelope was cheap, the address typed. No return address. My heart, an organ I thought had atrophied, gave a violent, painful lurch. I fumbled it into the deep pocket of my habit, the weight of it feeling heavier than a bar of lead. I feigned a headache and fled to my small, whitewashed room. I shut the door, the click of the latch sounding like a cannon shot. With shaking fingers, I slit the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single, faded black and white photograph. My breath stopped. It was me. Me at 19, perched on the edge of a metal-framed hospital bed, my face swollen from crying. And in my arms, bundled in a plain hospital blanket, was a newborn baby. I had no pictures from that time. I burned them all. Who took this? I was alone. I made sure I was alone. I let the photo fall to my lap, my fingers numb. The room was closing in. Underneath the photo was a single, folded sheet of typing paper. It was not long. Just 3 lines, typed in the same stark, impersonal font. I know what you did on March 14, 1957. I know you gave him away. He's been looking for you. And now, I've found you. The bell began to toll for evening prayers. I couldn't move. March 14, 1957. The date was branded onto my soul. It was the day my life ended and this performance began. The past, that ravenous wolf I had outrun for so long, was no longer howling at the door. It was inside the room with me. The letter shattered my 60-year routine. For the first time, the bells did not comfort me, they mocked me. My mind, unbidden, slipped its leash and flew back to 1956. Back to the endless, flat horizon of our failing farm in rural Kansas. I was not Sister Alara. I was Alara Vance, 19 years old, and I was suffocating. My life was not my own. It belonged to my father, Amos Vance, a man as hard and unforgiving as the drought-cracked land he worked. My mother was long gone, and my only future was to be married off to our neighbor, Mr. Gideon, a widower with rotting teeth and 3 small children. It was a fate I considered worse than death. Then, one day in late July, a traveling carnival set up in a fallow field. My father forbade me from going. "A nest of thieves and vagrants," he spat. But that night, I saw the colored lights against the black sky, and a spark of defiance, sharp and hot, lit up inside me. I slipped out of my window and ran. And that's when I saw him. He was running the ring toss, with dark, unruly hair and eyes the color of whiskey. His name was Julian. He was not from here. He was from everywhere. He spoke of New Orleans and the ocean, things I had only read about in books. For 3 days, I lived a double life. Chores by day, and by night, I met Julian by the creek bed. He kissed me on the second night. It was clumsy, and searching, and tasted of tobacco and beer, and it lit a fire in me I never knew existed. On the last night, he told me he was leaving, heading for California. "Take me with you," I begged. He grabbed my face, his hands rough. I can't. It's no life for you. But I'll come back, he swore. Promise you'll wait for me. I promised. I watched the red taillights of his truck disappear, leaving me alone in the suffocating dark. Weeks turned into a month. Then 2. No letters came. My father, oblivious, began making formal arrangements with Mr. Gideon. And then, the sickness started. One cold October morning, I was violently ill behind the barn. I stood up, wiping my mouth, and a cold, horrifying certainty washed over me. I wasn't just sick. My body had betrayed me. I was pregnant. That night, I couldn't hide my sickness. My father saw me. His eyes, cold and blue, narrowed. He didn't ask. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers like a steel trap, and he knew. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen. You are a whore, he whispered, his voice more terrifying than any yell. You have shamed this house. The night my father found out was the end of my childhood. He locked me in my room. You will not leave this house, he seethed. You will marry Gideon, as planned. He will take you as you are. This filth will be his problem, not mine. The thought of Mr. Gideon touching me was horrifying. The thought of him knowing, of him owning my shame, was something my mind couldn't bear. I was trapped. Julian was gone. I was alone, with this secret life growing inside me. For 2 days, I sat on my cot, listening to my father nailing boards over my window. He was making my room a true prison. On the 3rd night, I made my choice. I would not be his prisoner. I would not be Mr. Gideon's wife. I waited until I heard my father's rhythmic, heavy snores rattling the thin farmhouse walls. I used the leg of my chair to quietly, desperately pry the loose floorboard under my bed, the one where my mother used to hide her small treasures. It was still there, an old, rusted biscuit tin. Inside was $44 in faded bills and a handful of change, her life savings. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab it. I cried, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mama." I couldn't use the window. I had to risk the door. I crept down the hall, each creak of the floorboards screaming in the silence. I slipped out the front door into the freezing November night. I didn't take a coat. I didn't take a bag. I just ran. I ran the 5 miles to the 2-lane highway, the biscuit tin clutched to my chest. I hid in a ditch until the first Greyhound bus rumbled into view, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. I flagged it down, my arm waving frantically. The driver looked annoyed. "Where to, kid?" he grunted. My mind was blank. I just needed to be gone. "How far will this get me?" I asked, holding out the crumpled bills. He counted it. "Topeka. 1 way." I nodded. "I'll take it." The next few months were a blur of hunger and terror. I landed in Topeka, Kansas, a city where I knew no one. I found a small, dark room for rent by the week, paid for by scrubbing floors at a 24-hour diner. My pregnancy was obvious now, and the looks I got were a constant, silent judgment. The other waitresses, women with hard faces and tired eyes, either ignored me or pitied me, and I didn't know which was worse. I spent every waking moment terrified. Terrified my father would find me. Terrified of the birth. Terrified of the human being inside me, a person I had no way to care for. Julian's face was a fading dream. The pain started on a cold, rainy night in March. I had no doctor, no one to call. I walked, clutching my stomach, to the only place I could, the St. Francis Charity Hospital. They took me in without a word. The ward was filled with women like me, poor, alone, and scared. The birth was a long, agonizing haze of pain and loneliness. There was no one to hold my hand, no one to whisper encouragement. Just the cold, professional orders of a nurse who had seen it all before. In the gray light of dawn on March 14, 1957, my son was born. He was perfect. He didn't cry at first, just looked at me with wide, dark eyes. Julian's eyes. They cleaned him up and laid him in my arms. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, cracked wide open. A love so fierce and so painful flooded through me. He was the only thing in the world that was mine. And I knew, with a certainty that was as agonizing as the birth itself, that I could not keep him. I couldn't give him a life of scrubbing floors in a dark room. I couldn't be the mother he deserved. A nun from the adoption service came in later that day. She was kind but firm. "He will have a good home, Alara," she said gently. "A mother and a father who are waiting for him. It's the most loving choice you can make." I held him for 3 hours. I memorized his face, the tiny crescent-shaped mole on his cheek, the smell of his skin. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry. Then, the nurse came. "It's time." I signed the papers, my hand shaking so hard the signature was a barely legible scrawl. They took him from my arms. The emptiness that rushed in was a physical thing, a cold, black vacuum. I had given away my own child. I left the hospital 2 days later with $5 and a bus token the nun had given me. My body felt hollowed out, an empty shell. The world outside was loud and bright, and it felt obscene. I had no room, no job. I was just nothing. I walked for hours, not knowing where I was going, until I found myself standing in front of a large, stone building set back from the road. St. Jude's Haven. A convent. I hadn't been a religious girl, but standing there, I saw it for what it was, a fortress. A place to hide. A place where no one would ask questions, where no one would look for Alara events. I presented myself to the Mother Superior, a woman with eyes that seemed to see right through me. I told her a story, not a lie, but not the whole truth. I told her I was alone, that I was broken, and that I felt a calling to serve God, to atone for a life of sin. She listened, her hands steepled. "A life of penance is hard, child," she warned. "It is not an escape." But it is, I thought. It's the only escape there is. They took me in as a novice. I chose a new name, Sister Alara. Alara Vance died the day I gave up my son. Sister Alara was born the day I gave up myself. The life was brutal. We rose at 4:30 a.m. for prayers. We worked in silence, scrubbing, gardening, and praying. Every aspect of our lives was controlled. For me, it was a relief. The physical hardship was nothing compared to the emotional pain I was carrying. I threw myself into the religious life with a desperation that my superiors mistook for devotion. I prayed longer, worked harder, and spoke less than any of the other sisters. I was punishing myself every single day, for March 14th. Years blurred into decades. 10 years. 20. 40. 60. The convent in Kansas closed, and we were transferred to this quiet haven in Ohio. The other sisters grew old and frail around me. I became a fixture, the sad sister, the one who carried some unnamed burden. The secret was buried, but it was not dead. It was a cold, heavy stone in my heart. Every March 14th, I would lock myself in the chapel and pray for the soul of the son I had never known. And so my life went, until the day the letter arrived. The letter shattered my 60-year masquerade. The serene, pious Sister Alara was gone, replaced by a terrified 88-year-old woman who jumped at every sound. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I would be in the middle of prayers, and the words from the note would flash in my mind, "He's been looking for you." The other sisters were worried. "Sister Alara, you look unwell," Sister Beatrice said, placing a kind hand on my arm. "You're as pale as a sheet." I waved her off, blaming the damp weather. But I knew. The walls were closing in. 3 days after the letter arrived, I was weeding the rose garden, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the trowel. Sister Beatrice came hurrying down the path. "Sister Ilara! You have a visitor." My blood turned to ice. A visitor? For me? Who? She looked just as confused. A man. He's waiting in the front parlor. He asked for you by name. This was it. The sender of the letter. My mind raced. Was he here to expose me? To demand money? My legs felt like lead as I followed Sister Beatrice. I walked down the long, cool hallway, my rosary beads clicking in my pocket, my only shield. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the parlor. A man was standing by the window, his back to me. He was tall, dressed in a simple collared shirt and slacks. He was not young, perhaps in his early 60s. Can I help you, sir?" I asked, my voice a reedy whisper. The man turned around. And I forgot how to breathe. Time stopped. It wasn't Julian. It was a stranger, but he had Julian's whiskey-colored eyes. The same dark hair, now streaked with gray. The same line of his jaw. But my mind registered something else, something I had only seen for 3 hours but had burned into my memory. He had a small, crescent-shaped mole on his left cheek. My knees buckled. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. He took a hesitant step toward me. His own eyes were filled with a lifetime of questions, with a nervous, desperate hope. He held up his hand, and I could see he was shaking, too. "Are you," he started, his voice thick. "Are you Ilara Vance?" My name. My real name. I could only nod, tears welling in my eyes. He took another step, his face crumbling. "Mother?" The world narrowed to the small, sunlit parlor. It was just me and this man, this stranger who was my son. "My name is David," he said, his voice quiet. "David Miller." He didn't move to touch me, just stood there, waiting. I finally found my voice. You sent the letter?" He shook his head, looking confused. "No. I didn't send any letter." "What letter?" That was a puzzle for later. The only thing that mattered was him. He was here. "Please," I whispered, gesturing to a chair. We sat, facing each other, a 60-year chasm between us. "How did you find me?" He explained his story. His adoptive parents, the Millers, were wonderful people. He had a good life. He became a high school history teacher, got married, had a family. But he always knew he was adopted. After his parents passed away, he found his original birth certificate in their lockbox. It had my name on it, Ilara Vance. I had to know, he said, his eyes pleading. I had to know why. "Did you not want me?" That question broke the dam. The tears I had held back for 61 years came in a flood. "Oh, no," I cried, the words tumbling out. "No, I wanted you more than anything in the world." And so, I confessed. I told him everything. About the desolate farm. About my cruel father. About the carnival and Julian and his promise to return. I told him about the biscuit tin, the bus ride, the lonely birth in the charity hospital. "I had nothing, David," I wept, holding my hands out. I was 19. I had no money, no home. I couldn't give you the life you deserved. Giving you up was the only choice I had. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. He listened, his own eyes wet. He didn't speak for a long time. He just watched me, as if piecing together a puzzle. Finally, he reached across the small table and placed his hand over mine. His hand was warm. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. You were just a kid. You were trapped. You didn't abandon me. You saved me. And in that moment, 61 years of guilt, 61 years of penance, began to lift. We talked for hours. David told me about his life. He was retired now. He had a wife named Mary, 2 grown children, a son and a daughter, and 3 grandchildren. Grandchildren. The word seemed foreign, impossible. I was a great-grandmother. He pulled out his wallet and showed me pictures. A smiling, happy family. A family that existed because of a desperate night in 1956. They're beautiful, I whispered, tracing the face of a little girl with a gap-toothed smile. About that letter, David said, his expression turning serious. I didn't send it. But I think I know who did. My daughter, Sarah. She's very determined. She's the one who really did the digging. I was looking for years, but she's the one who found you. She's an internet sleuth. She found a record of a Lara V entering the St. Francis Novice program in 1957, right after I was born. She tracked the convent's transfer to Ohio. She must have sent the letter to, I don't know, to see if you were really here. My head was spinning. A granddaughter. A modern girl who used the internet to pierce my 60-year-old veil of secrecy. She's here, David said, glancing toward the door. She's waiting in the car. She was too nervous to come in, but she's the one who drove me. She really wants to meet you. Before I could even process it, he went to the door and waved. A young woman, maybe 25 years old, stepped into the parlor. She had David's kind face, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of a nervous energy. She looked at me, then at David, and then she smiled. Hi, she said, her voice small. I'm Sarah. I'm the one who sent the letter. I'm sorry if it scared you. I had to know if it was really you. Sarah rushed forward and, before I could react, she hugged me. It was a real, warm, strong hug. Grandma, she said, and that one word just about broke me. We sat together, the 3 of us, a family forged in secrecy and found by curiosity. We talked about their lives, about my life in the convent. But there was one last question hanging in the air. David finally asked it. My biological father, he said, the words clumsy. Julian. You said you never heard from him again? Never, I said, the old ache returning. He promised he'd come back. But he never did. David and Sarah shared a look. Well, David said slowly, reaching into his bag. This is the other part of the story. When my adoptive father, Mr. Miller, passed away, I found a box of his old work photos. He was a ranch hand in California in the late 50s before he came to Ohio. And I found this. He pulled out a worn, cracked photograph. It was a group of men by a truck. And there, on the end, smiling that same tired, dazzling smile, was Julian. I didn't know who he was, of course, David said. Not until you told me his name. But my father had written on the back. He turned the photo over. In faded blue ink, it read, Julian. A good hand, but haunted. Talked about a girl in Kansas. My hands flew to my mouth. Your adoptive father knew him? David nodded. It seems so. They worked together for 1 season. My father wrote in his journal that Julian was always talking about going back to Kansas, but that he'd heard her family had run her off. He must have gone back, and I was already gone. I wasn't forgotten. He hadn't just left. He had tried. He couldn't find me. The world I had built, my fortress, had worked too well. It had kept everyone out. The secret, once a crushing weight, was now just a story. The truth came out, of course. A nun having a secret son and grandchildren was not something that stayed quiet, even in a convent. There was shock, there was gossip. But the Mother Superior, a wise woman who had seen the real world suffering outside these walls, was compassionate. "Sister Alara," she told me, "your penance is over. God has given you your family back. It is a blessing, not a scandal." My life, once a rigid, gray line, bloomed into color. David and Sarah visited every Sunday. They brought Mary, and then my other two grandchildren, Mark and Emily. They brought their children, my great-grandchildren. I, who had never held a baby after that one day in 1957, now had a 3-year-old girl named Lily sitting on my 88-year-old lap, playing with my rosary. The empty, aching space in my heart, the one I had carried for 61 years, began to mend. It wasn't a perfect healing, the scar would always be there. But it was no longer a wound. I am 90 years old now. My steps are slower, but my heart is light. I still pray in the chapel, but my prayers are different. They are no longer prayers of penance and guilt. They are prayers of gratitude. I am still Sister Alara, but I am also Alara Vance. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. The letter that I thought was a threat was actually a key, unlocking the prison I had built for myself. I spent 61 years hiding from my past, only to find that my past was the one thing that could give me a future. Sister Alara's story shows that it's never too late for healing and that love can find a way, even after 60 years. What part of her story moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful true stories just like this one.